Welcome back, Pokemon fans. Angel of the Night 091 here, and we are going to be going over a tutorial on how to battle in Pokemon Generation 3 using the Dolphin Emulator, Pokemon Colosseum and XD, with Game Boy Advance support for Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, Fire Red, and Leaf Green. So as you guys know, in the past tutorials that I've done Stadium 1 for Switch Online, Stadium 2 for Switch Online, and we are bringing back Gen 1 and Gen 2 Wi-Fi battles. So I thought to myself, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could do Generation 3? And then after doing some research, we stumbled across the emulator called Dolphin. So that's what we're going to be covering here today. Now, system requirements for this, you can pretty much have a potato computer and you should be okay. So I'm looking at you there, Hef Nasty. You said that you didn't have a very good system, and I told you, well, you know, if you have a potato system, you should still be able to play it. So the only thing I won't be able to provide you links for in this tutorial are, of course, the ISO files for Colosseum and XD, and as well the GBA files for any of the Game Boy Advance games. Due to those being of an illegal nature, I have my own backups from my own personal collection, so just keep that in mind. So first things first, we're going to go to the Dolphin Emulator webpage. So in your browser, you can just type in Dolphin Emulator, and it'll give you the very first link, dolphin-emu.org. So you have to go to their website and download the most recent version of their emulator. So up at the top, just click download. You might get an ad or two on their site. That's perfectly fine. And then what we're going to do is we're going to download version 5.0.19870. Okay, we're going to download. And then what we're going to do is we're going to extract this to the desktop. Okay, it is going to come in a 7-zip file. If you guys don't know what 7-zip is, there is a website for that. If you just type in 7-zip, the website is, I believe, just 7-zip.org. Just download the latest one. It's kind of like a zip file, but it's a specific file format. Okay, so once that's onto your desktop, as you can see here, we have the Dolphin Emulator. We're going to actually go through and do a bit of configuration for it. So if we open up Dolphin, okay, I've got some files here we're going to go over. We're going to create a folder called Game Boy Advanced. This is for our Game Boy Advanced ROMs and game saves. We're going to copy over our GameCube games. You guys will want to create a folder called GameCube Games. And of course, put your ISO files in there for Pokemon Colosseum and Pokemon XD. In the Dolphin folder, the next thing you're going to need is the Game Boy Advanced BIOS file. There is a link for that in the description below. I will give you that link. Drag and drop the bin file into your Dolphin folder. I actually copied my memory card over from my laptop, so just kind of like an FYI, you don't need that file. It's something you can create in the Dolphin program, but for purposes of this tutorial, you won't need it unless you're going to be playing the game. Next thing is we have the texture pack for HD graphic files. So we're going to just extract that from the zip file. That link will be in the description below. This is so that way your Pokemon Colosseum will be in high definition quality graphics. Okay, I'm going to show you exactly where to configure that here in just a moment, but make sure you have those files extracted somewhere on your system. Okay, we're going to minimize this folder. We're going to minimize this. Close out of your WinRAR or 7-zip. And we're going to launch the game. So if we go into Dolphin, open up dolphin.exe, there will be 2 executable files there. Once Dolphin is opened, as you can see, this here is going to open up. Now, I had mine kind of pre-configured, so there may be some configurations that were already preset, but we are going to go over those right now. So if we go under Options and Configurations, first thing we want to do is we want to go to our paths. We're going to want to set a path for where our location of our games are. So if you click Add, we're going to set GameCube games, select OK. That will put the path, and that's why my game showed up automatically when I loaded them. The next thing is we're going to go to GameCube here, and as you can see, we're going to specify the Game Boy Advanced cores. So in BIOS, we're going to select the Game Boy Advanced BIOS.bin. This is so that way you can load up the Game Boy Advance Support controller, so you can use your game saves for Game Boy Advanced and to use it as a controller. Now, we aren't using any physical components here. This is all emulated. Okay. Next part, we want to configure where our Game Boy Advanced game saves are. So click the options here, go into your Game Boy Advanced, select your ROMs, and click Open. Okay, I already have my game saves here. One thing to take into consideration is that when you are connecting up multiple games to different port numbers, you have to specify what port number your game save is on. I'm going to show you exactly what I mean here. So on the GameCube, there are 4 controller ports. When you connect a Game Boy Advanced, what happens is there's 4 different ports. So it emulates different port numbers per port. So controller number 1 would be port number 1. Controller 2 would be port number 2. Controller 3, obviously port number 3, and port 4 is port 4. Each game save that you're going to configure has to have a port number. If it does not have a port number, it will not load properly. Okay? So in this situation here, when we are communicating between other players, the host has to have this configured. Port number 2 and port number 3, if you're going to be doing 1v1, this is important. Okay? So your game save, you have to rename the game save to being, in my case, 3 Pokemon hyphen Fire Red Postgame hyphen 2. That's going to tell my GameCube Dolphin Emulator that port number 2 is going to load up this game save. Port 3 is second Fire Red hyphen 3. Okay? So as long as you make sure you have this specified to the port that you are going to be playing, that's perfectly fine. Now, as the host of the Dolphin game with your opponent, you have to have their game save and you have to have a ROM that supports it. There is no ways around this, but I will show you that you will not be able to see your opponent's team or any of the screens when they're selecting their moves when we get into the tutorial further. Okay? So now that we've done that, here's where your memory card option is here. You can actually create this file. Just make sure you name it exactly the way that it's mentioned here. mem.usa.capital.usa.raw. Okay, that's for the memory card. So as you've done this, you've set your path, you've set your GameCube. The next thing we are going to do is we are going to specify the high definition texture pack. So if we go to graphics, we go to advanced, there is an option here that says load custom textures. Make sure that you have that checkboxed. Okay, if you do not have it checkboxed, it will not load any of the textures that we're going to put in. The next thing that we're going to do, we're going to enhancements. I myself am going to specify for 1080p with 4 times anti-aliasing and 4 times texture filtering. This specific setting here is going to be dependent on your computer and your computer hardware. Okay? If you do not have a decent computer with decent graphics, this may not load properly. Okay? If you have a potato computer, you may want to leave it on auto. Next part, we're going to go in and specify where our HD texture files are going to be. So let's take a look here to see where this is going to be located. I have to find the exact window where this is going to go. And that's not the right location. Graphics, enhancements, hacks, advanced. Okay. This is under a specific folder. So we have to go to our local C drive. We want to go to our users folder. We want to go to our user folder with your name. Then you're going to go to AppData. We're going to go to roaming. We're going to go to the Dolphin Emulator. We're going to go to load. we're going to go to Textures. Now, as you see here, I have a folder which is called GC6E01. If you do not have a folder there called that, you will have to create this folder. This folder is the exact name of the game, okay? So make sure that you specify that folder there in this path. I will make sure that this path is in the tutorial in the description. Once you do that, as you can see, I've already got my files listed there. When you open up the extracted Pokemon Colosseum HD pack, you go into Textures, go into GC6, highlight these all, and drag them in. Once they're in there, you can close these windows. Okay. To configure your controllers, you're going to want to configure your controllers for GameCube Port 1 and Port number 2. This is important for player 1 to be able to have these ports configured. Your opponent is going to want to configure the port for 3. Okay? As you can see here, there's Port 1, Port 2, and Port 3. I'm going to take off my Port 3 there. But if we take a look, I already have my Xbox One controller already specified. To set your ports, or not your ports, your buttons for each controller, you click on the button that you wish to configure, and then you hit the button. The button will automatically assign here. If you wish to use the keyboard, you can definitely do so. If you wish to save your profile, you can actually just call this Elite Controller and save. This will actually show you that there are 2 different configurations for this profile. Okay, just hit close once you've configured it. And for the Port 2, this is for your Game Boy Advanced. You have to make sure that it's set on Game Boy Advanced Integrated. This way you can control your Game Boy Advance screen. Okay, configure it. The best method I'm going to suggest is to use your keyboard, because if you have too many controllers on the desk, like I did in my first attempt at this recording, you're going to have complications, okay? Just use the keyboard for Game Boy Advanced. It's perfectly fine. If you have a controller, use that to play the GameCube game. So again, just specify what you want to use. Just click and tap which key you wish to use, and it will actually specify it. I'm going to call this keyboard. Close. And we are going to close. Now, you should be able to launch Pokemon Colosseum now, and you will have a secondary window for the Game Boy Advanced. Okay, as you can see here, we've got the game loading up on the GameCube. You've got the game loading up for Fire Red. So I'm going to show you here that the Game Boy game save for Fire Red loads up perfectly fine. We're going to use our keyboard to control the Game Boy Advanced. And as you can see, I've got my game save loaded up here perfectly fine. Now, as you can see, we have the audio going for the 2 games. That's perfectly fine. When we eventually connect up the Game Boy Advanced to the Pokemon Colosseum, it will actually stop and allow you to control it for your movesets. So this is okay. The Game Boy is perfectly set. The GameCube itself, it reads the memory card perfectly fine, and you can load it up and go into Battle Now or Colosseum. So right now we know that everything's working for your side. Your opponent should also do the same, but they're configuring port number 3 for their Game Boy controller. Okay? Your opponent has to send you their game save to be able to configure controller 3 to use that specific game save. Okay? And what I mean by that, if you look what I'm doing here, if we go back into our Dolphin folder in Game Boy Advanced, our opponent is going to be using the game save Second Fire Red -3. That is for port 3 on the GameCube. If we take a look under the controllers, in your situation as the host, do not configure port number 3. Okay? In options and configuration, under GameCube, you do have to specify that it is going to use that specific ROM for port number 3, or your opponent will not be able to have a game or a game save to be able to communicate. The next part is a little bit different. This is how you're going to set up your Netplay. In your situation, there may be some configuration required on your end in order to get the ports to work properly. So if we go to Tools, go to Start Netplay. In this situation, we're going to click Host. As you can see, my nickname is A91D. That is going to be significant because that's going to tell you that this is my desktop, which I'm recording off of currently. So the player number 1 is A91D. If we go to the Show in Server browser, we're going to specify North America. The name of the server that I'm going to set up is A91 Tutorial. And as you can see, I'm specified on Pokemon Colosseum. The biggest takeaway here is if you look at the port number 2626, if your internet router has a firewall put onto it by your service provider, or if you've configured it yourself, you have to open up port 2629 for your computer's IP address. If you don't do this, it will not allow you to set up the actual server. Okay? If you don't know what I'm talking about, what you have to do is you have to find out, first of all, what your default gateway is. So if you right-click your Start button, go to Run, type Charlie, Mary, David, click OK, type IP config, and hit Enter. This is going to tell you your network configuration, okay? So if you take a look here, I'm using my first Ethernet adapter. My first Ethernet adapter is this specific IP address here, 192.168.0.117. This is the IP address of my desktop. Okay, this is an internal IP, so there's no problem with you guys knowing what it is. The default gateway is 192.168.0.1. So what you have to do, you have to log into your router. To do that, open up your Microsoft Edge or whatever internet browser you're using. Type 192.168.0.1. Okay, you're going to get a page similar to this. This is the login page for your router. If you don't know how to log into it, chances are you're not an administrator on your network. If you are using your own router, your router underneath may have a sticker that tells you the admin username or your password. Okay? If you've configured this yourself, there's no explanation really required. So I'm logged into my router here. So if I make this full screen, if I go to Basic, there's port forwarding. So you have to set up a rule for Dolphin to allow port 2626 through UDP with your local IP address. What this is telling it is that when someone wants to communicate with you specifically on your internet, they are going through your router on port 2626 to your local IP address of 192.168.0.117 in my case. If you don't configure this, I cannot guarantee that it's going to work. Okay? So please make sure that if you do this, make sure you open up port number 2626 for UDP protocol with your local IP address. Okay? I'm going to close this. Once you've had this all configured up, we're going to click Host. Okay, it's going to open up a Netplay window, as you can see here. I know this is all sounding really Greek with the networking stuff, but I can guarantee you it's not as hard as it sounds. It's very, very simple. Okay, so now that we've got our screen loaded up here, we actually have to connect to it with our laptop. Okay, my laptop is going to be player number 2. If you are the opponent, go to Tools, browse Netplay sessions, scroll until you find the server. As you can see here, this is the 8091 tutorial server that I just created. All you have to do is double click it and it should launch up perfectly fine. Okay, in this case here, I can't do that on this screen, so I will do this on my laptop. Okay, I'm connecting up with A91. Now, as you can see, in the Netplay window, I have two players, A91D, which is my desktop that you guys are seeing right now, and A91, which is my laptop. Now, you have to do a few configurations so that way you do not see your opponent's screen. Go to Other, and make sure you have checkboxed Hide Remote GBAs. You do not want to see your opponent, and your opponent does not want to see your moves. You know, element of surprise and all that. So if you go to Assign Controller Ports, this is where you're going to specify what port number on the GameCube you're going to be using. By default, okay, you as the host are going to be GameCube Port 1. Game Boy Advance Port 2 is also going to be yourself as the host. Port 3 is going to be your opponent. Click OK. Okay, guys, so there's a couple things that you need to know before we proceed. So I ran into a bit of complication during my tutorial, and that was because I wasn't sure how Player 2 had to be configured, I guess. So in this tutorial, okay, make sure that when you get to this part here where you're going to start your Netplay, you have to go to Data and make sure you select Load and Write Hosts Save Data. The other one, under Other, make sure you specify Hide Remote GBAs. If you don't have this specified, it's going to show the opponent your screen. Next thing, under Assign Controller Ports, make sure you have it set up as you see here. Player number 1 who's going to control the GameCube has GameCube Port 2 for Game Boy Advance Port 2. GameCube Port 3 is your opponent, and they have Game Boy Advance Port 3. Now, when I said earlier you have to host your opponent's game save, you have to have their game save, and you have to have a ROM that supports that game save. Your opponent also has to make sure they specify the ROM for Port 3. If they do not specify the ROM for Port 3, under Options and Configuration in GameCube, it will not load anything for them, okay? They have to do this. So they have to put a game in, so Game Boy Advanced file for Port 3, and then their game save should also be the same name as the ROM, -3.save. So that way it can be for the Port 3. If you don't do this, this is not going to work, and you're going to be stuck in a roundabout, okay? So once you have everything set up correctly, you have your game save for Port 2, their game save for Port 3 as the host. The opponent also has to have the ROM specified for Port 3, as well as Port 3 on their game save. Okay, now you can click Start. Now each person is going to have a GameCube screen and a Game Boy Advance screen. With that being said, you're going to hear the audio from both of them. So it will be a little noisy at first, but it will go away when you set them up as the controller. Okay, we're going to go into the GameCube Pokemon Colosseum game. You're going to hit Start. As you can see, our HD textures are loaded up. If they weren't, this would be all blurry. You're going to go to Colosseum Battle. You're going to go to Gang Battle. And then you're going to go to 2 Game Boy Advances. From there, I'm going to specify a double battle because this is the type of battle I want to have. Generation 3 was all about double battles. We're going to click Yes. Now, in order to get the Game Boy game to communicate with the Game Boy Advance, you have to right-click your Game Boy Advance screen, go to Reset. So the host has to do this for connection number 2 first. We'll give this a second to pair up. As you can see, it's going to be on the Pokemon copyright logo. And then it should tell you that your team is fine. Make sure that your game save is saved in a Pokemon Center with the 6 Pokemon you wish to battle in your party. If you do not have them in your party, they will not load into the battle. Next thing, player number 2, which is your opponent, is connecting up to Game Boy Advance Port 3. They have to do the same thing. They have to right-click their Game Boy Advance screen, and then they have to go to Reset. As long as their Pokemon is in their party and saved at a Pokemon Center, this should pair up properly. And it did not for me this time. Okay, we're going to reset. This is also not pairing up this way either. Check it. Okay, try it again. There we go. Okay, standing by. We're going to set it up for the player 3. They have to hit reset. I'm on the copyright logo. Come on. Should go through. And we are now paired up. If it doesn't work the first time, you may have to try this a couple of times to make sure it's going to work. Okay, so now we have to make sure that we are going to hit A onto the screen. Player number 1 is going to hit... I hit B by accident. So the controller settings, I think, on the opponent's side, if I'm not mistaken, are different from what you're going to specify. When Retro was battling, he had to use the system defaults for the emulator. So the system defaults are going to be X for A, Z for B, and then your arrow keys are T, F, H, and G. So up is T, G is your down button, F is your left button, and H is your right button. There's no ways to change this. This is specified by the emulator in Netplay. I apologize, guys. On this one, I'm going to make sure my buttons are correct because I don't want to have to go through this again. So just give me 1 second. Port 2. My A button is Z. Okay. Yes! There we go. Okay, so as you can see, we're actually connecting up with my other game save. Completely different team altogether. Okay, so for our team, you actually control the Game Boy Advance screen. As you can see here, we're going through here. We're setting up what we want. For this, I'm going to choose Charizard. Now, what was it? Z? Yes. Z is my A button. This is what I controlled it to anyways, paired it to. So we're selecting our teams. I'm going to be honest, guys, I should have never set up controllers for the Game Boy because it was way too confusing. Hit OK. Okay, I've locked my team in. Now on player number 2, we want to specify our Pokemon. So I just want to specify that these game saves are not mine. I changed the trainer names for this specific purpose. So I apologize if I offend anyone with any of them. That is not my intent. As you can see, it loads up Pyrite Colosseum. And we are going to have both teams coming out here. So here we go, guys. Gen 3 Wi-Fi battles. It's really not that difficult once you get the settings set up correctly. So make sure you follow the tutorial exactly. I will not have any setting in here that will not work with the actual game, okay? So anything that I basically showed you should work, okay? So now with our Game Boy Advance screen, we can actually specify what we want to battle with. So I've specified the Z button, and we are going to go in and try to attack the Lugia. And our Metagross is going to go for the Meteor Mash into the Charizard. Alright. Over on to our GameCube on our second player. We're going to go for the Psycho Boost into the Charizard. And then with the Charizard, we're going to go for the Blast Burn into the Metagross. As you can see, that Charizard actually did a speed tie with my own Charizard, and unfortunately, the Metagross goes down. So now I have to choose a different Pokemon. And in pure Generation 3 fashion, we actually have to send out a new Pokemon right now. As you can see, the battle will continue on. There's the Dragon Claw going into the Lugia. Not really crazy effective. And then the Psycho Boost. This is awesome. So Psycho Boost into the Charizard. Charizard survives. So guys, this is how you can do your Generation 3 Wi-Fi battles. I hope you guys have found the tutorial helpful. If you did, make sure you go ahead and put a big thumbs up, post your comments, and I would like to battle with you guys in Generation 3. As I stated probably before, we are going to get Generation 3 tutorials set up to be able to battle the Game Boy games versus the Game Boy games, because I know there's some enthusiasts that prefer to battle Gen 3 versus Gen 3 cartridges versus Colosseum instead. This tutorial will work for Pokemon Colosseum and Pokemon XD. So thank you guys very much for watching, and hope to see you guys in some battles. Peace out. All right, what move am I going to do here now? Let's go for the Fly. We're going to go into the Charizard. And then with the Pikachu, I think I'm going to go for the Volt Tackle into that Lugia, because why not, right?